Thanks for tuning into another edition of Another Dolphins Podcast. Training camp has officially arrived, so I thought it'd be wise to put together a bit of a primer for fans who are attending training camp, but also a primer for those of us who are going to be watching from afar, aka Twitter, the blogs, everything like that. So to put together this guide, I thought there'd be no better guest than the 2020 Miami Dolphins Fan of the Year. He can be found at Ian693 on Twitter and be heard on the Dolphins Talk podcast. Ian Berger, Big E, thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Jake. And for everyone who's listening, I know Jake and we were talking beforehand, but I have to give some love to Jake because he was the reason that I started writing articles and then I started doing podcasting. You and I go back, about 8 or 10 years, I want to say, Jake, at least 8 years, with a little company or a little site called Cover 32. And we were all talking Dolphins back then. So, but thank you for inviting me tonight. I'm really glad to be here.
To put into focus about how long it was ago and just kind of think about it and reflect, I remember if you're watching this on the 560 WQAM YouTube channel, you see a tracker on the bottom that basically just says, "Welcome to Another Dolphins Podcast." While Ian and I were talking Miami Dolphins football, the website actually crashed simply because I think it was Brandon Browner and Richard Sherman just retweeted a post for this website, and we had a ticker going at the bottom of the website that said, "We got retweeted by Richard Sherman and Brandon Browner." So it's crazy,
Awesome.
how far things came where, everyone can go so viral and all of a sudden, little old us, we probably couldn't handle 1 million people on a website.
That's unbelievable. That's unbelievable, man.
But Ian, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Fan of the Year 2020. I watched some clips. We know I just mentioned it, but I want to say it again. We can hear your content on Dolphins Talk podcast. I noticed you have I don't know if it's a patch, but how many jerseys do you have that say Fan of the Year on it? Because those are probably the coolest things I've ever seen.
Well, I don't have player jerseys outside of Zach Thomas and Jason Taylor.
Oh, good choices.
So I've been for probably the last 15 years customizing my own jerseys that say Big E on the back of it. So I think I've got 4 or 5 jerseys in my closet that have Big E on the back, white, blue, different color combinations, and they've all got the patch because I'm very proud of that patch. But I will tell you too, the 6th one is my true Fan of the Year jersey. It's number 20, which represents 2020, which was the year I was selected for that. I try not to wear that one too much just because it starts, it's starting to wear away a little bit. The number's starting to come off a little bit, and I don't want to. And that one's not going to be replaced. That one's sticking with me forever.
Can you walk us through the story real quick of you just receiving that jersey, maybe opening it up?
So it's interesting because I didn't get the jersey in person. It was the year of the pandemic, and Travis Wingfield had announced over his podcast. So actually earlier on in the off season, he had me on and we were just talking about the off season for the Dolphins. Thought it was cool to jump on his podcast, but remember too, nothing was happening in person. A couple months later, he said he wanted to do a follow-up, and on his podcast is when he announced, you are the Dolphins 2020 Fan of the Year, the inaugural season for this Fan of the Year contest. And I was just blown away. And then everything got mailed to me, and I got my jersey. I got a traditional Fan of the Year shirt and some sweatpants, and I got a Chris Carter signed helmet behind me too, which was part of the process. But it was just something you as a fan could only dream about, like the process of everything. And I was just extremely honored to be selected, and I try to continue to do good things. Even though I won 4 years ago, I try to continue to do good things. So even every once in a while, I'll troll our friendly Bills fans or our friendly Patriots fans, but for the most part, I try to do really good things.
It's nice that you didn't say Jets, because with the Jets, it's not trolling. It's just honesty.
It's right. It's true. It's true. I have a lot of close friends who are Jets fans too. We get along, but on game days, we stay away from each other. So that's the way that works.
That's very understandable. And I want this to come out the nicest way possible, but there's definitely a line between a Miami Dolphins fan and a Miami Dolphins fanatic. And you don't become a Fan of the Year without being that fanatic. So was there a specific moment or time or year where you decided to take that plunge where it's no longer just, wearing a hat? It's, I'm going to get the custom jersey. I'm going to be, knee deep in this community, interacting with all these different people?
I don't think that there was one given moment, to be honest with you. I think it kind of evolved over time. Like the whole jerseys thing happened over time because I was like, who do I want to wear a jersey of? And then at the time I was like, I'm always worried that if you buy a jersey, that players might get traded the next season
Right.
or might move on. So I said, I'm never going to get traded. I'm always going to be the same fan. So I'm just going to get a jersey with my name on it. So that continued to go. But I will tell you, when I joined Twitter, joined Twitter, and it probably took me about a year before I actually started using it. And what happened was I was in this program called Leadership Broward, where all the leaders, every year they have like 25 or 30 county leaders that come in for training throughout the year. And one of the stops was social media and how you use it. And I said, I have Twitter, right? And I have 6 followers. Why would anybody want to follow me? Right? Because take the Dolphin stuff out of it, right? Why would somebody want to follow me? And they said, the moderators said, talk about things that you're passionate about. And I thought to myself, well, darn it, I'm passionate about Miami Dolphins football. So that's when I started. And that's when I realized like there was this nice little niche of Dolphins fans on Twitter at that time. And then I found that the team was actually interacting through Twitter. So that made me more excited. They actually had a program for a year that if you put a certain hashtag, you would get points. And those points could be added up. I don't know if you can see, there's behind me back here, I got 2 pictures, and that's pictures with the tight ends of the Dolphins that season, pictures of the wide receivers that season. Those were things that I actually used my points for. You use points for these experiences, and you either use Fins Up, Miami Dolphins, or Stronger Together, because that was our tagline back then too. So everything I would tweet out would have those and it just kind of grew. And then I kept connecting to other Miami Dolphins fans, and that was it. Like, I don't want to talk about politics. I don't want to talk about other things. Let's talk about Dolphins. And it just continued to grow and grow. So if it wasn't for Twitter, I don't know. I don't think I'd know as many Dolphins fans. Like you go to a tailgate, you only meet a certain like group of people, but through social media, you meet people all over the world, and that's the amazing thing. That's the good thing. That's the positive thing about social media.
God, Stronger Together. I think Clyde Gates, I'm still bitter about Believe in Miami. I think he did like a huge, when Instagram first started, I think he did a huge speech on there about how you got to trust the Miami Dolphins, and the 2011 Dolphins are going to be fantastic.
Right.
It didn't work out that way. Biggie, how often are you at the stadium outside of game day? Let's say in a year, how often are you around? Let's just say, this might be a little rough, but around the Miami Dolphins, would you say?
Outside of the season, is that what we're talking
game
about?
day, let's say. So, if you're there to get pictures at like a training camp, something on a Friday, I'll count that.
Yeah, probably 7 or 8 times through outside of game day, and that does count the training camp days that I'm going to, or every year in the off season they do invite season ticket holders for a feedback session, and I make sure that I'm there. The last at least 3 or 4 years, I made sure that I'm there because I have some good feedback to give. Plus, I hear some great feedback from other season ticket holders online that maybe can't attend. Right. So I share that information as well. And that's traditionally it, because like the players, if they have certain events, traditionally it's not going to be at the stadium. It's going to be like at different venues. The Jalen Waddle event that happened about a month ago, he was actually at St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale. So went down there. The Tua thing happened at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino, the Tua Luau. So it's just, but I try and get to, if there's something that's Miami Dolphins, I'm going to try and go, because you don't have, especially when the season starts, you have zero access to players, and outside of the season, usually they're doing things, they're out in the community. And if you have the opportunity to go, then go. And I try my best to do that.
You spoke about it just for a second there. Attending training camp, how long have you been going there, and how many practices have you gone to, let's say, on a per year basis?
So I started going to training camp when I would say it was probably in the 2010 era. So it's probably only been about 14 years. And I started going to the Davie camp. Remember too, if anybody has been around for training camp, back at Davie, they had the big bubble.
Yep.
And but the fans would sit in the stands, and for the longest time there was no shade. So you'd sit out there and you'd bake, but it was still worth it because you got a chance to see the Dolphins, right? Then they put the canopy on and you got a chance to go. And then I was able to start bringing my daughters because it's free. So what else are you going to do on a Saturday morning, right? Right before the season's starting and when you're getting excited for football. So I've been doing that. And then when they moved over to the Baptist Health Center, which is phenomenal, I've been trying to get to about 3 to 4 training camp sessions every off season.
Oh, man, I'm so jealous of that. Is it the same? Would you say, like, you watch an entire practice, and then let's say you drive home, you relax for a bit, you start scrolling Twitter, you start scrolling X, you read the Miami Herald. Would you say what you hear from the other people in the crowd and the beat writers kind of follows along with what you're seeing, or is it kind of a free for all when everyone's trying to grab whoever's the biggest playmaker of the day?
I think it tends to be a free for all because, again, too, some people just tend to focus on some things. And right. I'll tell you, I'm probably guilty of it too. I tend to watch the offense a lot more than I look at the defense, because that's where the excitement is, right? That's where you can see, all right, Tua's throwing the ball to Jalen Waddle because, you don't necessarily see who's tackling unless you're really paying attention to that. But again, like you said, it's so-and-so made a 75-yard catch and run. Rarely do you hear about the defense, even though last season there was a lot. I think at the beginning, before they put pads on, if I remember correctly, the defense usually looks pretty unbelievable. Once they put pads on, it becomes a little bit more even, I think, for offense versus defense. But the crowds are phenomenal. Sometimes, when it was the year of COVID, I actually we couldn't go to training camp for obvious reasons. So you had to pay attention to what the beat writers were writing about. But I always cautioned everyone, and I cautioned myself, because again, the beat writers are only looking at certain things too. They don't necessarily have the full view of everything that's going on the field. So they may just be focusing on the offensive line, or they might just be focusing on what the quarterback is doing, and you're missing so much. And there is so much happening at the same time too. That's the other part, because there's two fields simultaneously running. So it's hard, but it's enjoyable because it's football and it's our team that's out there. So that's it.
From your years of experience going, what are maybe 2 or 3 keys for fans who want to go down to training camp and check some things out? What should they be watching for, or what should they keep their eye
on? So, I mean, really, you want to get there early to training camp just because you want to get a decent spot. I think the higher you go, the harder it gets to actually see the field. Here's the other thing, and this is what I do, and I try and bring extras. I try and bring the full roster from number 00 up to number 99. And I separated offense, defense, special teams, because otherwise you don't remember everybody's numbers, right? And I try and bring 100 to 200 of them so I can hand them out to other people, because you want to pay attention to what's happening with everyone on the field. The other thing is, get yourself to the end zone area at the end of practice, because you have the opportunity to get player autographs or player pictures after the end of practice. And it is hot because it's in the sun, and it's usually around noon when that happens. So it's super hot, but it's still great. And then the third thing is, enjoy the experience of everything outside of training camp. Get there early so that you can be outside, because sometimes they have player autographs. They have a mini Dolphin store out there that you can shop at. They have different local vendors that have free drinks and free things. So it really is an event. I think the first training camp that fans can get to is next Saturday. And I think it starts at 10. I plan to get there at 8 because I want to experience everything beforehand, then be able to get in and get my seat and then enjoy, and then get the autographs afterwards.
And it's important to kind of think of it like as a networking event. Like, you can talk to other fans, you can maybe pick up a free roster, right? And then you can meet some players. You never know what's going to happen. When you're sitting there, I don't think it matters how high up you go to see someone like Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle. I think that speed kind of stands out to you. But since you've been going to training camp, just to kind of put into perspective that all 90 players are so incredibly talented and they're such great athletes, are there a couple players who stick out just as training camp standouts that you just recall just being like, wow, like they just left you speechless a little bit?
It all depends on the year. It all depends on the practice. I will tell you that I'm looking forward to seeing Patrick Paul, just because the man is 6'9", right? And 330 pounds. And he's going to be an easy one to pick out when you're looking on the field. So I'm going to be interested to see how he's able to use his power, how Butch Barry is going to be able to help coach him to use his power to be a good offensive lineman. And then too, I love it when they do the 7-on-7 drills, because that's when you really see, them chiseling each other's skills. Like a Tyreek versus Jalen Ramsey, or some of those guys in the middle. Also, I'm looking forward to seeing some of these guys who may have been a little injured last year, like Javon Holland. I want to see that he's healthy, he's able to go. I know that there are some guys that are not going to be at training camp right off the start, but I really want to see some of these other guys come back, be healthy, show what they can do in training camp, and end training camp healthy. That is the biggest out of everything. We don't need anybody hurt heading into the season.
Let's look at it a little bit. Starting with Butch Berry, starting with the offensive line, who do you think are going to be those first 5 out there hitting the sleds? You obviously got to think Tron Armstead, left tackle. We just heard that Isaiah Wynn's actually going to be on the PUP list to begin training camp, which is a little strange because when we go back to last year, he suffered a quad injury after starting 7 games at left guard. And the idea was that Mike McDaniel said, yeah, he's going to miss some time, but we never really understood that it was something so severe that he'd be put on the PUP list going into training camp. Obviously, the Dolphins signed Aaron Brewer to be the center. Right guard, I think, is a big old question mark, and you got Austin Jackson at right tackle. So can you help me fill in those spots there?
Yeah, I think it's obvious Teron Armstead. It's going to be interesting to see how much he actually practices, though, because I think that I think McDaniel's going to be very careful with him, obviously, because we don't want you to get hurt. We want you to be prepared. And we know that you know how to be an offensive lineman, right? So there's that. And as you mentioned, Austin Jackson is pretty well set. And a lot of people don't think about this, but Liam Eichenberg, I'm hoping he could take that Austin Jackson step, and two, if, Liam was forced to play that center role, which is a role that he had never played before. I think he may be competing for that right side. I know Robert Jones is slotted in as the right guard right now, but I think Liam could definitely jump in there if necessary. And then too, it's great to have some of these other backups like Lester Cotton. I thought he did a very valiant job when he came in. And I'm hoping that Wynn comes back and that he does end up being ready for the regular season. Cause I thought when he was in, he did a valiant job as well. So, I mean, the Dolphins, again, I gave Butch Berry a lot of credit because we had 12 or 13 variations of offensive linemen last season. Versus, by the way, the Buffalo Bills, who had 0 variations. They had the exact same starters from day one to the last week of the season. That would be so nice for us to have that type of continuity.
Hearing that,
it just never happens.
Games blows my mind. 17 games with the same lineup, just knowing how physical football is. I mean, it's absolutely insane to me. How do you feel about the fact that someone like Liam Eichenberg's taking snaps both as the backup center and the right guard position? Because I look at guys like Robert Jones, Lester Cotton. It's not often that your backups have experience starting playoff games. And again, that doesn't make you a superstar, but I think there's a benefit to that. And I also think that it's a little harder when you have guys jumping around from positions to maybe for them to reach their ceiling. So what are your thoughts on having Liam Eichenberg both be a right guard and a disaster scenario backup center?
I love it. I love the fact that we're cross-training offensive linemen, to be honest with you, because as we saw last year, there are some games where you might have one guy go down. You have other games where 2 guys might go down. And it's great to have these backups that can step in. They're not going to live or they're not going to play at the same level as a starter. That has to be expected. But you don't want them to come in and then just absolutely collapse because they're not familiar with that role or they never played that position before. So I think getting all the offensive linemen or the majority of the backups be able to jump into a couple different spots, I think makes a huge difference.
Who starts against the Jaguars at right guard?
Here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to be Coach McDaniel for a second.
I love it.
We're going to go through training camp. And we are going to determine through training camp who is best at that position because no one is going to be guaranteed that spot, right? They're going to have to compete for that spot. And whoever is the best, Robert Jones, Liam Eichenberg, whoever it is, will earn that spot for week 1. Period.
Beautiful. Absolutely perfectly said as Mike McDaniel. Something I'm super interested about all training camp because I think a lot of the time it's going to be about the process, just kind of seeing everyone figure things out. What are your thoughts about special teams, just understanding how different it's going to be this year? Because if it was me, I'd be always just trying to find that special teams field, seeing whatever they're trying to cook up over there.
I think it's going to be the weirdest thing to watch, to be honest with you, man. And I know that they're used to this. What was it in the XFL? They're used to this type of kickoff and we were talking last night with OJ McDuffie,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, I envision, someone fast, like a Devon Achane, even Tyreek might want to be back there. Jalen Wright may end up back there as the kick returner, because all they need is one seam.
Yep.
And then they are gone, right? And I think that could end up being an advantage for the Dolphins, because I think I put out a stat earlier this week. 4 of the top 10 fastest players in the National Football League are on this Dolphins offense. Put one of those guys back there and create one hole for them. That's all they need. And they are off to the races. And I think that could end up making a difference. And also, which isn't a little thing, I think you're going to see that not as many people will get hurt on the kickoffs, which I know is the whole reasoning for this, which is another reason why not have one of your fastest guys back there, because that used to always be the concern, right? Don't put our top wide receiver as a kick returner or punt returner, because we don't need them to get hurt then. Well, now it's going to be harder to get people hurt in those types of roles, especially for kick returns. Punt returns still keep somebody else, but for kickoffs, let's get one of these speedsters back there.
Special teams has been one of the largest weaknesses for the Dolphins over the last couple of years, I feel. I mean, they were absolutely decimated, and then that Bills game, Week 18, just absolutely kills me with that kick return for a touchdown. How confident are you that Danny Crossman, still being the defensive coordinator, special teams coordinator, I think he came in 2019, I think he took over. Ryan Gosselin, who's been covering the NFL for 50 years, he actually does a great job ranking special teams units, had the Dolphins ranked right around 31, I think. Looking at these special teams changes, how do you feel about the Dolphins improving that special teams unit? How much do you think they could jump up in just one offseason?
I think there's a lot of questions about Danny Crossman, unfortunately, because the unit did not perform well last season. And that, the statistics show it, as you mentioned, being ranked 29th out of 32 teams. That's not good, period. But something that resonates with me from last season, during the preseason, when Chris Greer was at the press box, or he was talking to the press, and they were talking about the offensive lineman. He said, "You guys worry about the offensive line a lot more than we do," meaning him and Mike McDaniel. So I'm going to give him the benefit, because right now we're worrying a lot more about special teams than they are, because obviously they kept Danny Crossman, which a lot of people thought he wasn't going to make it 1 week after the end of the season, let alone start again, right? Or coach again. But I think the other thing to that too is that I was not impressed with Jake Bailey last season.
Same.
I know, if I remember correctly, we re-signed him again, or we extended his contract, and I don't think he necessarily deserved that, but let's see what another season does behind that. Mr. Jason Sanders, he used to be money every single kick. And then something happened, and I don't know if it was a mental break or something, because sometimes kickers, it's all in your head, right? You're either going to kick it straight because you practice this 1,000 times a week. But I don't know what happened, but then it finally clicked. And, for him to kick that game winner against Dallas, that's when I was like, all right, we're good. He's good. I was holding my breath a minute, but it was like, what was it, a 35 yard field goal? I'm like, this is a chip shot for this guy. He's got to make it. And of course he did. And we won that game. But I like him. And our long snapper, Blake Ferguson, I think he does all the right things. He practices appropriately. I don't think there's ever been a mistake that I've seen coming from him. So I guess it's to be seen, to be honest with you. And I think our special teams is going to win, and they're going to be talked about highly if we can get some touchdowns on these kickoff returns, or at least a lot of yards from these kickoff returns.
One of the questions I started to bounce back and forth with as we've gotten closer to the preseason is if there's going to be any sort of kicker that can kind of gain some momentum during the preseason, whether it be a punter or kicker. Do you agree? Do you think that Jason Sanders is pretty much secure? I'm kind of in that boat. He has a cap number of $4.5 million. There's still going to be about $2.1 million in dead money if he is cut. And you mentioned it, that Cowboys game, he's had some clutch kicks while he's been a little inconsistent. I don't necessarily think there's a way where an undrafted rookie can come in and prove enough in one offseason that, hey, I can take over for someone despite, having a pretty large contract that can make some pretty clutch kicks when you need them.
Yeah, I don't foresee any changes with Jason Sanders. It's good to have the competition. It's good to know that, hey, listen, if you stink it up in the preseason, you stink it up in training camp, there's somebody right next to you that wants your job. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think when push comes to shove, I think Jason Sanders is going to be the guy week one. Just makes the most sense.
Completely agree with you. Switching to the defense here, Anthony Weaver's first year headlining the unit. We just heard that both Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb are starting training camp, on the PUP list. We got some interesting names here. Chop Robinson, Shaq Barrett, Mo Kamara. Who stands out to you as maybe one of those guys who's going to take the reins of that pass rush group early on?
Well, I'm hesitant to say because we haven't seen them yet on a football field together, right? So I'll tell you what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that Chop Robinson comes in, and Weaver supposedly is going with a 3-4 defense. I think that's his style. That's his scheme, if I heard right. So if Chop can get a huge blast off the line to try and rush the quarterback, and he can disrupt the quarterback, not necessarily sack him, but at least disrupt him, I think it'll be a success for him. And, the fact is that you really don't have any other choice to start. Yeah, it's going to be him and Shaq Barrett on the outside. But outside of that, I mean, if we go into week one and Mohamed Kamara is starting over Chop Robinson, and not for health reasons, but because for skill reasons, I think people are going to look at Chris Greer even more and say, why did you take this guy first round? When you've got somebody who's in the later rounds that's starting. So I do think Chop Robinson will be that guy. I just want to see him in action. I want to see him on the field. I want to see him against the starters on the offensive line and see how quickly he's able to blast. Supposedly he's extremely athletic. There's who's the outside linebacker in Dallas, the all-pro
Parsons.
Yeah, Micah Parsons. There have been some people that have compared his body style and his athleticism to Micah Parsons. So I can hope and pray and dream that is the case, because if that is the case, then, hey, listen, Mr. Phillips and Mr. Chubb, take your time getting back. We've got it covered. You get yourselves 100% healthy, and then you'll be able to come back. And then we get a rotation. Imagine that. Imagine we have a great rush, and then all of a sudden we get these guys back and we're able to rotate these top tier players. Shaq Barrett, I don't know what we're going to get with him. He's older. Yeah. He's had an amazing career. As soon as the Dolphins signed him, I'm like, oh, that's a name we all recognize. I think he'll do great with our team. But again, he's older. What happens when you're older? Well, your motor is not as fast as it used to be. But the biggest challenge with signing older veteran players is they could get hurt a little easier than when you're younger, even though, things happen, crazy, weird things happen. But you tend to see some of the older players go down before the younger players do, which we are all hoping that does not happen with any of these guys.
When looking at the defensive tackle position, how long will it take you while at training camp, to realize that Christian Wilkins isn't there? And then just to follow up, how long do you think it will take us to realize that when watching the actual games?
Man, this is going to be the question of the off season. They got Terrence Hart as the starter to replace him. But I keep joking. It feels like we've signed 50 nose tackles and we've said, all right, guys, this is a competition, and whoever ends up being the best nose tackle in a 3-4 defense in training camp and in preseason games is going to win the starting position. And I think it's going to take probably all through training camp, because you're going to see guys rotating with the ones, and you're going to say, all right, let's see how you do. And I think part of it is also understanding what the playbook's going to look like on the defensive side of the ball, and understanding the schemes and understanding where you need to go to. We'll see. Because again, if you've got 5 guys rushing, if you got the 2 outside linebackers and the 3 it'll help on the run side, but I don't know what it's going to do for the passing game. And I think we'll probably find out against the Jacksonville Jaguars if it's going to be successful or not. I don't know.
Yeah, the Dolphins were top 5 in sacks last year, but I mean, Christian Wilkins was right around 10. You had Andrew Van Ginkel at 6. You had Emmanuel Ogbah at 6.5. Bradley Chubb's not going to be there to start the year. He was at 10. Jalen Phillips, 6.5. So that's all of them. That's pretty much
38 basically right there. Yeah, I just counted with you. 38 sacks from all those guys that will not be on the field.
Sealer had 9. He'll be probably that only guy who had that high total for him coming back. And, you know, you could even make the argument that Sealer's a great player. And that's not what I'm trying to say, but 9 sacks, a lot of that's from Christian Wilkins eating up double teams. You have Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb. Those guys definitely help. Big E, the last question I have here for you about the defense is how are you feeling about the secondary? Do you think it'll be better than last year when you consider switching out Xavier Howard for Kendall Fuller?
Yeah, and it's hard to kind of talk about Xavier Howard and how a replacement might be good. And the reason for that is I respected what Xavier Howard did so much with the Dolphins, and really he's probably the best back that we've seen since the Sam Madison and Patrick Surtain days, right? Mm-hmm. So to say somebody's going to come in and play better with him, it's a little hard to say, but I think Kendall Fuller is a healthier back than Xavier has been the last year or two. And I think that's going to make a difference. And as long as Jalen Ramsey can stay healthy, because remember when we first got Jalen, what happened that training camp, he had gotten hurt, was out a couple of games. So I think it can be a positive for the Dolphins to have these additional players. And you know, we've seen a huge, about 50% of the defense, the expected starting defensive players switched out, right? Mm-hmm. And some of these guys, again, are some of those older veterans, but they have the leadership and they know what they're doing. And, you know, you got Calais Campbell back there too. And I've heard that he is a leader amongst men with any team that he's played with. So I think he'll be able to help these guys if there's any challenges, if there's any struggles, he'll help bring them all together. I don't feel like right when free agency started and we started losing everybody, I felt like a gut punch. It was like, how the heck are we going to make it through this?
Yep. Then
when they started signing these guys, some of these familiar guys, some of these all pros, some of, you know, these guys that were perennial all-stars, not even all-stars, Pro Bowl players. Mm-hmm. I was like, all right, we're going to be okay. We are going to be okay. And here's the other thing too. Not much has changed on the offensive side of the ball. We were the second best offense in the National Football League last season. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, you just need an offense that's going to score more than what your defense gives up. So if the defense is giving up 21 points or 28 points, the offense absolutely has the ability to score 30 or more points in a game. They just got to do that, and they got to do it consistently. So I'm not too worried about the defense. Also, sometimes, and I heard this, that it usually takes about 3 to 5 weeks for mm-hmm. a new defensive scheme to get installed and for everyone to be on the same page. So that may be the case with Anthony Weaver, which means that our offense, which has been consistent now for 3 years, we're going to need them to put some points on the board, which I think they can do.
At Ian693, Big E, thank you so much for taking the time. The final question I have, fill in the blank. When I get to the training camp, the first thing I'm going to be looking for is
all the other Dolphins fans.
Oh, I love it.
You said it before. It's a social event. It's most of these people, most of the Dolphins fans that I love, that I go out there to look forward to seeing. I haven't seen them since January, man. We're in July. So it's been 6 months. We still talk on social. You know, sometimes I talk to these guys over the phone, but I haven't seen them. And it's going to be a big family reunion a week from Saturday, you know, at Hard Rock Stadium, the Baptist Health Facility. So that's really what I'm looking forward to first. The practice is practice, man. It's sometimes you can sit there. It gets a little boring after a while. You really have to be a true football fan to understand what's going on a practice field and be interested in it. And I will tell you that's a small, I'm going to be careful when I say this. It's probably about half of the fans that are there that truly understand and are excited about what's happening on that football field. Mm-hmm. The other half, they're happy to be there. But I can't wait, man. I can't believe it's here. We're a week away. You know, we're a week away, and then we're 2 or 3 weeks away from a preseason game. It's great. It's a great time of year, and I think it's going to be a special season for the Dolphins. I know I tend to say that like every year.
Famous last words.
It really, but we're coming off of 2 years of making it to the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
I think we get past that hump this year, man. I really do think we can win in the playoffs and then see where we go from there. That's it.
Biggie, you have said it all. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully next time I'm talking to you, maybe we'll be celebrating that first playoff win in 20 years. Let's hope, right?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. No question.
Well, Josh, we were begging for the football season to come back, and these are the things that happened. So thank you, everyone who has bared with us. You have listened to 2 shows now that we have had in the books, ready to go, and then a projected starter on the Miami Dolphins, Shaq Barrett, decided he was going to retire. Completely understandable. He wanted to go spend more time with his family after joining the NFL in 2015, a 2-time Super Bowl champion with 59 career sacks. Completely understandable. But Josh, at the same time, when you consider Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips, those injuries that the Dolphins are dealing with, it's hard not to be a little frustrated when I think we can both admit we were pretty excited to see Shaq Barrett come in and be the veteran leader of this edge rush group. But all of a sudden, things are going to look a little different entering training camp.
Yeah, and I mean, it's perfectly on brand for us, right? We sit here and talk about the pass rushers, talk about Shaq Barrett and his importance early on, and then he ends up retiring. And like you mentioned, you can't fault him one bit for retiring, but now that does leave a massive void on the Miami Dolphins, I guess, on the edge, right? So they have some guys that are bringing in, but to hear that Shaq Barrett retired, 72 hours before the start of camp, definitely not what the Miami Dolphins wanted to hear, definitely not what Anthony Weaver wanted to hear. But, as we've seen last year, as we always have seen, you have to adapt, right? That's what makes these NFL teams great. You have to adapt, and the way the Dolphins adapt, could be could depend on what success they have early on in the season.
It'll be really interesting throughout training camp to see who really starts to make some noise, because you're just opening it up for the rookies at this point. Chop Robinson, he's looking like a day 1 starter. Josh, the Dolphins are looking like Mohamed Kamara, a 5th-round rookie, will also have to be a day 1 starter. Looking at this depth chart, I mean, who do you have the most confidence in? If I'm just going to list them off to you, you got Chop Robinson, you got Mohamed Kamara, you got Quentin Bell, and Ezekiel Vanderbaugh. Who do you like in there?
Yeah, I can joke Zeke, but I mean, I almost feel like you have to go with Chop Robinson, right? I mean, it's that quick step he has, the way that they can get creative with him, that quick step, that quick first step, and then that speed, his ability to get around the edge. I mean, I'm intrigued to see what they can do with that, but, I say that, and I still think that, I think we talked about in a previous pod, that we could look at this at the end of the year and see Mohamed Kamara, maybe having more sacks. So that's another guy that I'm really intrigued to see. And we have to talk about Grayson Murphy, right? I wish I had the tweet pulled up from Travis Wingfield, but he just dropped whatever the pressures was that he had throughout his first 3 seasons, or his 3 seasons in college, was top of the collegiate level. So that's a guy that you've talked about ad nauseam, and we've talked about in this podcast. So I don't think he's going to start, but that's a player that definitely could step up now with this, opening that we're seeing with Shaq Barrett retiring.
So some people have come out and said, and our editor at the Finsider, Kevin Nogle, he actually wanted to write a story about this, but some people were like, classic Greer, like, why didn't we just sign Andrew Van Ginkel? And there's a whole aspect of that I think people are missing, where Van Ginkel signed a multi-year deal, where when the Dolphins were able to sign Shaq Barrett, it's because it was a 1-year deal where they had 3 of those void years sprinkled on just to try to make sure he gets paid enough money. So that's why the Dolphins didn't really invest the big bucks. But Josh, the Dolphins aren't going to just settle with the group they have now, and makes sense, right? You wouldn't feel too confident about having 2 rookies going out there starting week 1, especially at the same time where you're losing Christian Wilkins right in the middle. So I wrote a story about 3 players I thought the Dolphins could talk to. And it started with Carl Lawson, because that's someone, a former Jets defensive end. That was somebody who visited with the Dolphins earlier this offseason. He didn't even come back and visit. So we can throw that name to the side, at least for now. Tyus Bowser was another name that I came up with. Former Baltimore Ravens defensive end. He was released as a cap casualty, and he struggled with injury issues of late. I think one thing we need to keep in mind as we try to figure out how the Dolphins can piece together this position group, it's all about the risk versus reward balance. You're not going to go out there and find a single guy in free agency still available that doesn't have some massive red flags. So Tyus Bowser, he's only appeared in 9 games since the start of 2022, but he's someone I'm kind of interested in just because he has the experience in Anthony Weaver's system. He was a former 2nd-round pick, and I'm always jealous of the teams like Baltimore and Pittsburgh, because it does seem like whether it's defensive end or linebacker, those AFC North teams just kind of produce just, one guy leaves, the next guy just steps in over and over. Bowser wasn't a starter for the first 4 years of his career. And then when he emerged as a starter in 2021, he had a career-high 8 sacks and 25 quarterback hurries. So I thought he was just starting to reach his peak potential as a full-time player. So, Josh, those are two names that instantly came to my mind. I was leaning Bowser, but where do you stand, and what have the Dolphins been up to?
Yeah, well, first let me just backtrack. I looked it up. Murphy had 162 pressures his last 3 seasons in college. So shout out to Travis Wingfield for that. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right on brand. I think Carl Lawson would have been a great, get or someone they could have brought in. And Tyus Bowser, we know he has familiarity there. So you can go back to yeah. I was gonna say you can go back to whatever draft that was, and I remember posting just 4 pictures of the guys I liked, and I just posted a picture of Bowser as one of them. So I would have been interested in that, but the Dolphins were going with a little bit more familiarity, I guess. Right at home with Emmanuel Ogbah. They are visiting with the team today. You mentioned the Miami Dolphins. We are recording this Monday afternoon, so if anything happens, I'll probably sign as soon as we get done with this. But yeah, Emmanuel Ogbah is visiting. He's 31 years old, as we know. Was making around $15 million last season, which is absolutely absurd. He had a little bit of a role with the Miami Dolphins, so that was one name. And then the other one, I have this written down, Yannick Ngakoue, 29 years old, played 592 snaps last season with the Chicago Bears, 22 tackles, 7 quarterback hits, and I believe 4 sacks. So I joked this was the 69th overall pick of the 2016 draft, 69 career sacks. A player that's a little bit younger than Emmanuel Ogbah, has some success off the edge. I didn't think it was interesting that I believe it was a Montez Sweat quote going around where he said a lot of his success came because he was alongside Ngakoue last season. So he was a little bit upset they didn't re-sign him. So to bring him in, to have him compete with Emmanuel Ogbah, there could be some other veterans names in there as well. But what are your thoughts, Jake? I mean, a lot of us immediately thought, okay, let's bring back Emmanuel Ogbah, let him come back. We paid him a lot of money last season. He already has a little bit of familiarity with the locker room, but Ngakoue is definitely a guy that the Dolphin fans, for a while we've been talking about him.
So I'm always good at looking real stupid, and that's what I did with my story, because I wrote that I didn't think Emmanuel Ogbah would be back in Miami because his agent, Drew Rosenhaus, made it very clear that he wanted to be a defensive end in a 4-3 system. And we don't know too much, but I have a feeling, Josh, this is a scenario where beggars can't be choosers, in the sense where Ogbah was looking to be just a full-time defensive end in a 4-3 system. You mentioned the age. He's still someone who can go out there and play the majority of snaps on a defense. But all of a sudden, if the place, where people forget, when Ogbah arrived in Miami, he had back-to-back seasons with 9 sacks. Like, this was a productive player for the Dolphins. So I think once you see the injuries and you see kind of the scenarios change a little bit, all of a sudden it's not necessarily Emmanuel Ogbah is a wrong fit for the Dolphins and Ogbah is looking for this defensive scheme. All of a sudden it is these guys know each other very well. Ogbah's ready to commit and help these guys again. Like, you see how the perspectives change a little bit. And I'll be honest, I'm all for it. Like, I have no problem looking like the big dumb idiot on the internet when I say that I didn't think Ogbah was going to happen. Yannick Ngakoue is a little interesting to me, Josh, because starting in 2019, he was in Jacksonville. 2020, he spent time with the Vikings and then Baltimore. 2021, he was with the Raiders. 2022, he was with the Colts. And then last year, he was with the Chicago Bears. He's like the definition of a journeyman, which that makes a lot of sense for what the Dolphins need right now. So, Josh, you're sitting at that fork in the road right now. You have Emmanuel Ogbah to your left. You have Yannick Ngakoue to your right. Who are you following to sign on this Miami Dolphins roster?
Can we get both? Is that an option? I mean, I saw people joking with that, like bring them both in. Why not? I think I go with Yannick Ngakoue. I'm going to keep saying it, Ngakoue. I'm going to keep saying his name so we get practice in case.
Have your pinky up when you're saying it like that.
In case they sign him, because again, he's a little bit younger. I think he brings a little bit more speed off the edge. But again, I think back to Emmanuel Ogbah. I mean, we have done podcasts where we talked about how important he was to those early defenses that we had with Brian Flores, and how he could move all over the defensive line. So, oh man, I'm still going to say Ngakoue. I feel like the younger player, again, you mentioned him being a guy that's kind of traveled throughout the NFL, but being that consistent player that, teams can just sign in free agency that can come in and do their role, right? I think he started 13 games last season. We know what happened with Ogbah throughout his time with the Dolphins. I mean, I don't think he really saw much of an impact or even much playing time until the Jalen Phillips injury happened. But still, he ended up with 5 sacks and an interception. So, again, man, I take either of them. But I think Ngakoue would be the one. You probably named off all them stats, but I had to make sure I read off everything on my paper.
Oh, you're all good, man. And then another name I wanted to add, excuse me, sorry about that. Another name I wanted to mention just because he seems inevitable, Melvin Ingram. Would you really be surprised if Melvin Ingram isn't out there with his big smile opening day, just marching out there leading the squad? I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of played like the Predator, right? We saw the dreads flowing. He was always in the backfield. I thought you were going to say Charles Harris. I thought that's where you're going with that one because, I mean, he looked okay.
Do you know who hasn't retired yet?
Yeah, say it. Go ahead, say it.
Officially?
Okay.
Let's just bring back Cam Wake, baby. Like, this is the most disrespectful thing in Miami Dolphins history. The fact there hasn't been a huge celebration for the one man that brought Dolphin fans joy for a decade as they were one of the worst teams in football. Like, that Halloween night, like, I don't want to just play the hits with Cam Wake because it's a lot more than just the hits, just somebody who's there every day. Get Cam Wake in here, Josh. If the pass rush is going to struggle, why not bring in a professional monster who might not have been working out recently? But I trust Cam Wake to go out there and get a couple sacks for sure.
Yeah, man, and you're saying that, and I'm wondering, are they going to get him into the Hall Ring of Honor the same time they, bring up those new throwbacks, right? The old school like cartoonish dog, like 2000 Dolphin logo. That would be perfect,
dude,
right? Like
that.
we're gonna induct him in on this day, and we're gonna bring back those throwbacks, the orange ones. Did they wear those when he got that walk-off sack? I can't remember. I'm spinning out of control here, man.
I think they did.
Yeah, we could bring back Cam Wake. We can joke about whoever it is, but the Dolphins need to do something, right? For as excited we are about the rookies, excited we are for some of the camp battles, and eventually getting Jalen Phillips back, Bradley Chubb back. They need that veteran dude like a Shaq Barrett with the experience, the ability to go out there and secure the edge and come out, rush the passer, be an asset in the run game. So again, as we finish this up, I'm sure the Dolphins are going to make a signing, and we're just going to sit here and joke. But yeah, I'm intrigued to see if there were any other players involved in those workouts. Which again, that's something we'll find out as soon as we get off here.
But that is it. We just wanted to spend a little extra time here just chatting about the recent moves for the Miami Dolphins. And the news is just going to keep coming. We have Connor Williams. He's visiting with the Seahawks. I hope all goes well with him. Training camp's here, Joshua. We've made it. Thank you so much, Big E, for joining us and participating in this episode. I hope everyone learned a bit in our training camp primer, even if we did mention Shaq Barrett a couple times. And at the end, I might as well say, sorry if I said Shaq Lawson at all, because that was another name because the Dolphins were visiting with Carl Lawson. Shaq Lawson was on the team. Shaq Barrett's now on the team, so it's been a mess. But that is all the time we have on Another Dolphins Podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. We will be back soon with some news and notes from mini camp, training camp, and all the above. But until then, fins up.